Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you this evening? Good. Did you have a good day today in Albia? Yeah, fantastic. Well, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Professor Alan Walker. Give it up for him.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And it's so good of you to come along to this presentation. Whenever I join a cruise ship, I never know who I'm going to meet. And on this occasion, I've met a special group of people who share, I think, a common language. Most of you, I think, are from North America, mainly from the United States, but some are from Canada who I've met. And there have been others, not that many, from the island continent that is Australia. So we're all, fortunately, English-speaking peoples, although I think someone once said that the English and the Americans were divided by a common language. So if I use a phrase as we go along through these sessions and you need a translation, just come up afterwards and sort of say, what did you mean when you said flat? We say apartment, whatever. But basically we share a common language, which is not always the case when I come on board ship. So this afternoon, I'm going to present Italy to you, the basic backgrounds. One of my problems when I come to the ships is that people come from various backgrounds. They come from various experiences. Some people, I've just been walking around the room, some people have been to Italy many times. Other people have never been to Italy. So in my presentation, I have to synthesize those two aspects into something that will be revealing and meaningful to everyone, hopefully. So that when we leave the ship, having come along to my presentations, everyone will go away a little more empowered regarding their knowledge, in this case this afternoon, about Italy. Now you may say, what techniques do I use? What are my techniques? Well, my techniques are multidimensional. They come from multidiscipline. This is not a unidiscipline presentation. So that I'm not going to give you an in-depth analysis of the geography of Italy. I'm not going to give you an in-depth analysis of the architecture or of the history. But we will draw upon those various disciplines, and in an interdisciplinary way, hopefully we'll reveal something about this first country, which is called Italy. We professors tend to chat on a little, and I've got to watch my time. So I think I'm out of here about 5:45. So when it comes 20 to 6, 5 minutes to go, I shall have to wrap up pretty quickly. I'll have to try and remember that. So this place, this state, which we call Italy, it's a state that we hear a lot of these days. It's a state in the United Nations. It's a state in the EEC, in the Economic Community in Europe. But it is of recent foundation. It goes back to the year, the unification of Italy, of 1861. And in 1861, what we call Italy, the state of Italy, came about. Can I ask you, what do you think the first capital of this state of Italy was? Florence. Any other offers? Naples. Venice. Sorry? We've had 3 offerings there. The first capital of the United Italy was not Rome. It was Torino, Turin, in the north of Italy. That was the first capital. And in fact, when Italy was first founded in 1861, Rome wasn't part of it. And either was, the other place where we finish our cruise, either was Venice. Venice was not part of Italy. Venice did not join Italy until 1866. And the unification, the full unification of Italy, came about in 1870. So a little background regarding the state. It's a recent foundation, although when you come to Europe, you tend to think of Europe and its history dating back 2,000 years to the Roman period and beyond. Now, what about the size of Italy? How big is Italy? I can give you a statistic. It's something like 301,000 square kilometers. Now, that's not going to mean a great deal to you. But if I say in North American terms, or American terms even, although the configuration of Italy is somewhat different to the state I'm going to name, it will give you some idea of the size of Italy. Because it's one of my favorite places in the United States. I go down to Organ Pipes National Park, right in the south of this state, and up to Tucson, where there's a university, and up to Flagstaff and the beautiful red rocks of Sedona and Oak Creek Canyon, and the mining centers such as Jerome. I am, of course, referring to the state of Arizona. So this land that we're walking around, called Italy, we've been out and about today, and now we're sailing off, and we're sailing southwards. It is the same size, approximately, as Arizona. Now, in this country that's called Italy, the population is something like 58.5 million people. So 58.5 million people are crammed in to the state of Arizona. So the other day when you were in Florence, and I hear that there were loads of people about, very crowded, and again in Pisa, the same thing, very crowded. It's not surprising, because the density of the population in Italy, which has 58.5 million, is totally different to what you're used to in the United States, where I think my latest statistic is something just under 300 million. So a tremendous difference. And if you look at the size of Arizona, that is the size of Italy, in the context of the United States. So it really is quite small. So we have a high density of population in Italy compared to the United States. Now, in terms of the population, the life expectancy of a young person in Italy is 80 years of age. In the United States, it's 78 years of age. So there's a minor difference. The Italians are likely, on average, to live a little longer than the average American. We in England talk about a Mediterranean diet that helps Italians live longer than Americans, and also longer than British people, where we suffer high degrees of heart complaints and so on. And the Mediterranean diet, based on fruit and vegetables and fish, helped down, of course, with some red wine. And that diet supposedly is a factor, not necessarily the factor, but is a factor in the life expectancy of an average Italian being 80 years of age. The population increase of Italy is minuscule. It's something like 0.04%, which compares to the United States, where the figure is something like 0.9%. So your population rate is increasing far greater than the Italian rate. And the Italian rate, in fact, is hardly moving at all. When we think about religion, in Italy, 90% of the population profess to be Catholic. That's not to say that they attend church regularly. Only about 1/3 of Italians, of the 90%, attend Sunday worship on a regular basis. But 90% of Italians profess to be Catholic. My photographs, by the way, we've just had a presentation in here regarding digital and so on. I first went to Italy in 1960. And sometimes I think about that and crikey, 47 years ago. And my pictures are taken over a vast period of time then, from 1960 through to the present time. So on the streets of Rome, I just happened to see these three monks, and I thought, well, that'll illustrate the point of the importance of the Roman Catholic religion in Italy. 90% are Catholic. I'd say a few words about the physical makeup of this state we call Italy. We're looking here at the northern part of Italy, and the adjacent countries that border Italy are France here in the northwest, Switzerland, Austria over here, and Slovenia here, the old part of Yugoslavia before the breakup of Tito's Yugoslavia. That was Yugoslavia there in the northeastern part. Now, the physical geography of Italy changes quite radically from north to south. Up here in the Northland, we have the Alps. Now, the Alps, they're very similar to the Rockies: glaciated scenery, alpine scenery, hanging valleys, cirques, combes, pyramidical peaks, the usual glaciated scenery you will find on the borders between Italy and Switzerland, for example. If we come a little south, we'll come to an area which has a variety of names. You'll find a variety of names to describe this area. The Po River Valley, the Great Plain of Italy, the northern plain of Italy, as we see on here, the Plain of Lombardy. All these names are the same name for this area, which is really the heartland of Italy. This is the core. This is the northern industrial region. But it's not just the northern industrial region. It's very important because it has the best land in Italy. We've been going around a little bit so far, and one thing that you can't fail to recognize about Italy is that it is a very mountainous country. But here, in the north, in the northern plain, you have not only the greatest area of lowland in Italy, but you also have the best land because of the river deposits. The Po River, for example, has over thousands of years deposited very rich soils. So the best agricultural land in Italy is to be found here in the north. And this is where the great cities of Italy are to be found. Milan, Torino, Venice, Genoa. Some of these places you may well have been to. Some of you may have gone to Genoa yesterday, and we're all going to end up in Venice at the end of this cruise. So this is the heartland of Italy. I'll come back and develop some of these themes a little later on. This is what it looks like. As you can see, it's a sort of undulating area, rich farmland with major cities. Italy itself, what geographers call a peninsula of peninsulars. So it's made up of a main peninsula and a series of minor peninsulas leading from the major one. We're heading south now from Sardinia and heading for Naples, and then we're going to move south. Hopefully, I haven't been chatting to the captain about the route that he's taking, but usually when I'm on cruise ships, we head south to Sicily here, to Taormina, through the Straits of Messina. And the Straits of Messina divide Sicily from the toe of Italy. And hopefully, on the day that we go down to Naxos, which is the port for Taormina, we'll be able to see something about the Straits of Messina. Now, a little to the north, you might be able to see these islands. These are volcanic and wonderful islands, and I don't know whether we'll be in the dark when we pass through that area. I'll show you a couple of photographs that I've taken in past trips anyway in just a moment. Now, leading down from the Great Plain, we have the Apennine Mountains. This is the backbone of Italy. It's equivalent to the Appalachian Mountains on the eastern seaboard of the United States, or the Rocky Mountains in the west. I don't think there's anyone here from England, but it would be equivalent to the Pennine Range in England. It's the backbone, in other words. What does it look like? That's a typical shot I've taken in the Apennines. So a mountainous area, not on the scale of the Alps, of course, but still mountainous. Not the best of farming. There is some good farming there, but that's the Apennines for you. Now, yesterday we were in Portofino, along the Riviera, and where we anchored, and you looked out onto the coast. You'll notice something, that the coastal plain in Italy is very limited. And we saw a good example yesterday at Portofino. The mountains and the hills coming right down to the sea. And the little, when we came on our tender, we got off and we looked at this rather wonderful and beautiful location that is Portofino, which you'll remember from yesterday. And when you got off the tender, and if you looked up to your left, you would see the Church of St. George. But immediately you get off the tender, you're looking up, so that the mountains, the hills come right down to the sea. It's a feature of Italy. There's not much in terms of a coastal plain here. Now, I think that we have a change, but I put that slide in of Sorrento, the cliffs in Sorrento. We won't be far away. I think we're docking in Naples this time. But again, you can see very limited in the way of a coastal plain. The cliffs here coming right down to the Bay of Naples. So immediately after me talking about this, you'll understand that Italy is a very mountainous country, and that the best land is to be found in the north, in the central plain, the plain of Lombardy and the Po Valley. That's where the best agricultural area is. We're coming down a little later on, a couple of days' time, to the Straits of Messina. And this is a photograph of northeast Sicily. The hillsides, and again, the mountainous region of Sicily, that mountainous area which we've seen in the peninsula itself continues as we go into the island of Sicily. The city of Messina, which we will pass on our right-hand side as we go south through the Straits of Messina, it was the scene of a dreadful earthquake and tidal wave. at the beginning of the 20th century, when something like 80,000 people were killed and about 90% of the buildings of Messina were destroyed. We're heading just about 10 miles south of Messina. I think in the literature they talk about Taormina. Taormina is not a port. Taormina is the Greek-Roman center on the hill, which I will show you. The port that we usually go to is Naxos, N-A-X-O-S. Before we get there, let me just show you a shot from Messina, looking across the Straits of Messina to that toe of Italy. So it's very narrow. So if it's light and you're interested in these sorts of places, do get up and go out on deck and have a look at the Straits of Messina. It's well worth it. It also has historic significance, which I'll talk about a little later when I review 20th century history of Italy. It was the point where the American 7th Army under General George Patton came from Palermo across the north of Sicily and met up with our own General Montgomery and our desert rats who had been fighting the Italians and the Germans in North Africa for 3 years, where they met up here at Messina, and then they had to cross from Messina, cross that body of water, and head into the toe of Italy. We'll talk about Italian history a little later on. Some of the islands just to the north of Sicily, wonderful places, absolutely wonderful places. We have classic volcanic islands. If you look at that, if I was to ask you to draw a picture of a volcanic island, that is probably what you would look at. And Stromboli is still very active. It's about 3,000 feet high in elevation and is still, as I say, active. It would be nice to see those. Whether we'll be able to, whether it'll be light or not, I'm not sure. We're heading south anyway to Taormina. This Greek-Roman theater, this Greek-Roman center of Taormina. This is a photograph taken in the Greek-Roman center, and we're looking across the valley, if you haven't been there, and we get some blue sky. It'll be absolutely wonderful, because we're looking at Mount Etna, and Mount Etna is about 11,000 feet high. And in April time, I took this shot one April, and you'll see still the snow on the mountain. Hopefully, we'll see some snow. It just adds a little extra to our pictures. So you can see Mount Etna from the ship down at Naxos, but if you go up to Taormina, you'll have this view as we look from the Greek-Roman theater across to Mount Etna. And that particular shot I took anchored in the Bay of Naxos a few years back, but with a zoom lens you can capture Mount Etna. And I think the ship is running an excursion, a trip to Mount Etna, and some of you may well be going on it. It's certainly well worth doing. But that's what you'll be visiting, Mount Etna, about 11,000 feet high. I'm down on the ship in the Bay of Naxos, and I'm looking to Taormina. So you'll see the local geography of the Naxos-Taormina area. The Taormina is up here, and we're down in the bay at Naxos. Naxos actually has historical significance because it was the center of Greek culture in Sicily before the Romans in the 6th century BC. So Naxos, where we go, does have significance in its own sense, in its own historical sense. Now that's the furthest south that we go in the cruise. And sometimes people are surprised when I sort of say, well, or some people come up and ask, well, yeah, Taormina, Sicily, how far south is it? And what is it equivalent to the United States? Well, if you live on the western seaboard of the United States, we're in San Francisco. Now, that may well surprise you. You may well think, and certainly we think in England, of Italy being quite to the south. But in actual fact, in American terms anyway, when we get down to Sicily, when we get down to Taormina, we're actually only in San Francisco. Does that surprise people? And I don't leave the people who live on the eastern seaboard out of this. We're in the state capital of Virginia there, which I don't even have to name. I know you know where the state capital of Virginia is. So if you live on the eastern seaboard, the equivalent place to Taormina would be here in Virginia. The northernmost point that we travel on this cruise is Venice. And Venice is about 45.5 degrees north of the equator. Now, 45.5 degrees north of the equator, in American terms, sorry, not really American terms, in North American terms, would be here in Montreal. So when you're in Venice, you're on the same latitude. I think you sometimes use the term parallel, don't you, in the United States? Latitude as Montreal. I know there are a few Canadians here, and that's the City Hall in Montreal. I'm always amazed, I don't sort of talk about French Canadians, and you know a lot about the French culture in Quebec and so on, but I'm always amazed when I'm in Montreal that I see a statue of Lord Nelson, who defeated the French at the Battle of Trafalgar. And he's actually there outside the City Hall in Montreal. So I do find that rather strange at times. But anyway, the equivalent location when we get off the ship in Venice, in American terms, in North American terms, would be here in Montreal if you live on the eastern side, in the eastern seaboard. And if you live on the west, well, when I was looking through my photographs, I didn't actually have a photograph of Portland, Oregon, but that would be its equivalent. So I put in a map reference instead of Portland. So that's where you would be on the west side. So Taormina and the port of Naxos is where we're heading in this lecture. Next. Now, my technique varies, and I don't know what you expect professors to do, whether you expect professors to walk around the room and chat and so on. This is a technique, and I use it sometimes. And then other times I get behind, I don't know whether you expect professors to be behind a lectern. Sometimes I go behind the lectern, and we have a more formal structure, and I get through a lot of information rather quickly. So that's what I want to do on Taormina. How are we doing for time? 15 minutes. Oh, right. Oh, that should be plenty. Okay. Taormina. We're looking across from the ship anchored in the bay there at Naxos to Mount Etna. And I'll say something about the background. When people go to Taormina, they usually want to see the Greek-Roman theatre, but it also has various medieval and Renaissance buildings, and hopefully I'll be able to take you a little walk down the main street in Taormina. But the city of Taormina, up on the bluff, it's above the Ionian Sea, which you can see in our photograph, on the bay of Naxos. And it has a double advantage in that the city looks across to this wonderful view of Mount Etna. Mount Etna has local significance as well because it provided some wonderful volcanic soils that the local farmers have used, and they're able to grow locally in the Taormina area a wide variety of crops. Mediterranean in nature, in the main, grapes and almonds, citrus fruits and vegetables. These are typical crops of the area where we'll be. So Mount Etna, as I've said, it's about 11,000 feet high, and it erupts from time to time, and erupts in a spectacular way. I don't think it will do when we're there. The main crater has not erupted for many years, but there are minor craters, vents, that do erupt from time to time, and we have various lava flows. I was talking about Messina and the volcanic activity there and its implications for the people of Messina when, in the early part of the 20th century, there was this great loss of life when there was volcanic eruption and a tidal wave. So we are located at Taormina, just south of Messina. There's Messina, the Straits of Messina, the islands, those volcanic islands that I was talking about with Stromboli, and heading south through the Straits, and we come down here to Naxos, and there's Taormina, about 10 miles to the south of Messina, in the northeast corner of Sicily. So this is the Greek-Roman theatre of Taormina, which I'm sure many of you are going to visit. I certainly would recommend it. It's certainly a place to see on the cruise. First of all, it was a Greek theatre. The Greeks obviously coming before the Romans, and it was constructed during the Hellenistic period of Hieron II in the 3rd century BC. As described earlier, it has an outstanding location set above the clear waters of the Ionian Sea with the snow-capped smoking Mount Etna, which we can see in our photograph. I think this theatre tells us something about these Greeks who came to Sicily around about the 6th century BC. I think the theatre tells us something of their profound respect for the importance of beauty, of a love of theatre, of drama, of tragedy, and of stage representation. It reminds us, perhaps, of the authors and characters, of the poets and philosophers, of the thinkers and the sculptors who took Greek civilization and culture well beyond the boundaries that was Greece. However, the Romans took control of Taormina and Sicily in 212 BC. The Romans immediately began to radically restructure the Greek theatre. And according to the Roman idea, they transformed it into an amphitheatre where it became a spectacle. Spectacle sports were held under the Romans in this theatre. Gladiatorial combat took place. So when you go there and you walk around the theatre, just have a think about that. The radical change in the land use and the function of the building of this Greek-Roman theatre. As in 212, the Greeks were removed by the Romans. It radically changed the function of this theatre that you will visit. I recommend that you walk up to the back of the theatre. You'll get some excellent photographs of the front of the theatre and looking across Mount Etna. And if you have a look at the back of the theatre, you'll look out onto the coastline, and it'll give you a very good view of the coast running north up to Messina. So do wander up, if you get the opportunity, to the back of the theatre. You'll also get some excellent photographs at that location. That's a typical example. So although the function of the building changed through time, the wonderful spectacle of Mount Etna remained the same. This is a view looking from the Greek-Roman theatre down onto the Bay of Naxos, and we see a ship there anchored. When we'll probably be anchored in the bay in such a location, we'll take the tender across to Naxos. It shouldn't be too far to that pier area there in Naxos. So it shouldn't take too long. Looking down with the Bay of Naxos and the 20th century development along the waterfront, these are hotels. Taormina is the #1 tourist spot. It's the honey spot of Sicily. So around that, we've created a lot of employment for the local people. Many thousands of visitors come every month and stay down here in Naxos and then go around Sicily and obviously up to Mount Etna and to the Greek-Roman theatre. Let me take you for a rather swift sort of walk through the main street of Taormina, starting at the western end of the main street. I'm not sure where your guide will take you to start with, but probably at the western end. So this is the main street, and in the main street, the Corso Umberto, it tells us everything about the later history of Taormina. And here we're looking at the Cathedral of San Niccolò, which was built in the 13th century. So we've moved on from Greek and Roman times to the medieval period, the 13th century. And you'll see this Cathedral of San Niccolò if you walk down that main street. The facade which we're looking at is rather austere, and perhaps it reminds you more of a fortress. But I think it has its elegance. It's a sort of rough and ready building, but it has its elegance. The top there gives a sense of crowned by a sort of battlement. But it'll be one of the first places that you'll see on your walk through the main street. This is a shot taken down the main street, the Corso Umberto, and we're looking westwards with the Cathedral of San Niccolò on the left-hand side and the church square, which you can see on the left-hand side here. So you walk down this street, stop in this square, observe the cathedral and the statue, and then walk on past this administrative building, which is the town hall. That's the administrative building. Walk on past that. No, nothing of great architectural value. It's slightly different, I suppose, to 20th century administrative buildings, maybe in the United States. But it has some value architecturally. But you walk on past that anyway, and head down to the what is known as the 9th of April Square, which probably they will take you to. If you're doing it yourself, you can walk down. Do make sure you stop in this 9th of April Square. It's about halfway down the main street. It's a center of social gathering for the local people. And it's an excellent vantage point, another one, for viewing Mount Etna. We're looking there at the Porta di Mezzo gate with its 17th century clock, and it dominates one side of this central square. The building, in fact, was built over an earlier Greek building with Greek walls. That's something about the history. You can't actually see that when you'll be walking down there in a couple of days' time. In the same square, you'll see the Church of San Giuseppe. It's got a double flight of steps which you can walk up. I think it's worth 5 minutes of your time. Go up and have a look at the Church of San Giuseppe. It has a Baroque facade, as you can see. And the interior is not that special. It's sort of a large single chamber. But as I say, it is worth 5 minutes of your time. And then at the side of the Church of San Giuseppe is the elegant campanile, the bell tower. And also in this same square, have a look at this building. And this is the Church of Sant Agostino. Still in the same square then of April the 9th. This is originally a Gothic building, and it was built in the middle of the 15th century. As you can see, it has an arched door and a splendid rose window. Another place, spend 5 minutes. Its function has radically changed. It's now actually the library, the local library. That's its function. Now, when you're in the same square, turn your eyes up the mountainside. And if you look up the mountainside, you'll be able to see this. I took this photograph from the square. And you're looking at the sanctuary of Madonna del Rocca, which is situated high above Taormina. And the sanctuary is a religious complex, partly hewn out of the bare rock, and it stands on a limestone spur on the southeastern slope of Mount Toro. It is marked by a white cross. I might have had a zoom lens on that, but you'll get that photograph, I think, without too many problems. So when you're in the square, do look up and see this monastery. Well worth a photograph, I think. If you look down the hill from the same spot, you're looking at a complex known as San Domenico. And it's also an important part of the history of Taormina. It dates back to the second half of the 14th century, and there is an old group of buildings that are still there from the 14th century. And it was originally a monastery, although its function changed in the 19th century, and it is now a very upmarket hotel. And that is located there. Again, giving you excellent views looking down the hillside to the port of Naxos, and in the opposite direction to Mount Etna, and looking this way to where I've taken the photograph, towards the Greek-Roman theatre. So when you are in the square, you have these various photo opportunities around the square, so they're worth 1 or 2 minutes of your time just to record them. The Corso Umberto, then, is the main street in Taormina. It's full of tourist shops, so if you want to spend a little money on the various items here in Sicily, you'll have many opportunities in these small shops as you walk down the main street. This is walking a little further eastwards down towards the Greek-Roman theatre, looking back up the street, the main street. And if you get fed up of walking down the main street and you want somewhere a little quiet, if you turn either up the hill or down the hill, it'll take you into these wonderful side streets. That'll give you a bit of shade. It probably won't be that hot, but in the high summer, visitors do appreciate being able to get away from the main street. The Palazzo Corvaja is our last stop as we head down the main street, and this dates back to the 11th century and the Arab period. It has a tower-like edifice, as you can see, and was in the past possibly a fortified construction. It was built between the 14th century and the 15th century, and in the year 1410, the Sicilian Parliament met here and elected a Sicilian king called Federico de Luna. In the same square, you'll find the Church of Santa Caterina. Again, I think not a wonderful architectural building. The Campanile, the small bell tower there on the left-hand side, but again, worth a stop, worth a photograph, worth a couple of minutes of your time. We're running out of time. We've almost run out of time. This evening, have looked at some of the physical aspects of Italy. We've looked at the size, we've looked at the population of the country. I've hinted at the society and the economy, and we've finished up in the wonderful Greek-Roman theatre in Taormina, and also the wonderful volcanic Mount Etna. Hopefully it'll be quiet on the day that you go. I'm sure it will do. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming along and attending the little presentation. And tomorrow, I think I'm on a little later at 6 o'clock, when I'll look at the north-south divide in Italy, talk about the northern part, the industrial area, the agricultural area, and look at the Mezzogiorno, the land of the midday sun in the south, and we'll contrast it socially and economically. I'm also aware that you sometimes like a little information book before you get there regarding the various ports, and I'll talk a little about Corfu. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time, and have a good evening. And before that, have an excellent dinner, which I'm sure you will do anyway.
As we chart a distinctly different course in the world of luxury cruising. Allow us to surpass your expectations as we bring you your world, your way.